was certainly going to be an area of my focus. And so I decided that fertility was going to be it, and mostly because, to be honest, I just love babies. And I thought, what a wonderful way of contributing to the world, bringing healthy children into the world. And in the beginning, that was pretty much the focus. It was helping couples with optimizing their health prior to a conception attempt, really in a preconception type of way. And as I began that work, it was very clear to me very quickly that was a place where I could make a difference. But there were lots of people that were coming to me who were experiencing difficulties taking home a healthy baby. Either whether it was they were experiencing difficulty conceiving, or they were experiencing difficulty in recurrent miscarriage, or whatever it was at the time. And so I then decided I started to work more with couples in that arena as well. So couples who were trying to conceive, but also couples who wanted to optimize their chances of having the healthiest possible baby. And it was a flow-on effect from there. Where I started to get better and better results with couples who were having difficulty. And I also realized that often, as much as couples who wanted to do preconception preparation were committed to their health and being as healthy as it could be to bring a healthy baby into the world, the couples who were most committed, to be honest, were the people who were having difficulty. And they were most committed in the way of, they would do the things consistently that were required of them to really optimize their chances. And for me, that is something I love. I love working with people who basically are focused and committed to reaching an outcome, achieving a goal. And that's then how I started to focus much more on that patient demographic.
Yeah.
And that's how we got to where we are today, where literally we work with couples who have been, trying to overcome infertility and miscarriage when other treatments have failed for over 2 years. That's typically who we help now. So yeah, it's been a long journey, and here we are.
Thank you. Did you experience any personal challenges when it came to having children yourself?
Look, what was fascinating is that I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome at the age of 18. And I had very regular cycles for many years. I had, and the way that I was, of course, given that diagnosis was over the phone by a 60-something-year-old doctor to an 18-year-old, female. So, and literally what he said was, after I did all the tests, actually I went to him because I hadn't had a period for 6 months, and it was the first time that I hadn't had a period for in a long time. My periods were kind of irregular, but quite consistent in its irregularity. It would basically, I would have a period every 4 to 6 weeks, and it was kind of consistent in that. And then this one time, my periods just disappeared for 6 months, and I was like, this is not quite as normal as I would like to see it. And at the time, I was lucky because I used to work with a group of obstetrician gynecologists. And so I pulled aside one of the gynecologists one day and asked her, I said, hey, can you tell me, is this normal? What, I've done a pregnancy test, I'm not pregnant. And she says, look, you probably need an appointment. And so I went to somebody else that I didn't work with. I didn't feel quite comfortable, going to any of the doctors that I worked in the same practice with. But I went to another doctor, and he ran some tests. I arrived in his office, and I'll never forget. I explained what my concern was or what my issue was. And the very first thing he said, and I said, look, I've done a pregnancy test. I know that I'm not pregnant. And he's like, well, everyone's pregnant until proven otherwise. I'm like, okay, well, I'm sure that I'm not. And so he then recommended that we do some tests. We did. He says, call and get the results. And then that's when he dropped the, very interesting line of, you have polycystic ovarian disease and you're probably never going to have children. And that's how I found out that I had PCOS. It was nothing more, nothing less. And I, for many years, thought in the back of my mind, wow, am I ever going to be able to have children? That was a big consideration. And it was one that didn't concern me too much until I decided that, okay, well, I actually think that I might want to. And took me a while to get my cycles back in order, to get it back to normal. But I applied pretty much, everything that I teach my patients to do. And we did that, my husband and I, for a period of time. And I was very able to conceive naturally and overcome PCOS twice and two healthy baby boys, which was wonderful. So, yeah, you could say that I certainly did have some challenges, but I think because of what I knew, it was made a whole lot easier than women who, 50% of women of the reproductive age suffer from PCOS, and that is the number one cause of infertility in women of the reproductive age. So it's a big, it's a big problem for many women out there.
Do you think conventional medicine is failing women? Just going back to what you said then about the doctor saying to you that you'd never be able to have children. So many people hear that, so many women, so many couples hear that from the doctors who they look up to and who they believe. And, when you start to believe in something, we all know that what the mind expects to happen tends to happen. It doesn't become it becomes a reality. So, just even the terminology, the language that the conventional doctors are using can be quite damaging to individuals if they don't look at alternative methods. So why do you think that the traditional approach isn't working as a whole?
Look, I'll be honest, and it's an interesting question. I'm currently doing a master's in public health at Harvard University, and the thing about my approach is that I am very, very science focused. And, evidence-based is a very important part of what we do. And obviously, I believe that we have the success rate. I mean, our program has a 78.15% success rate where everything else hasn't worked. I believe that we have the ability to do that kind of level of work because we leverage science and evidence. And there is no going back to the days where, there was a potion that you could take or that you were offered, and that was the solution to all of your problems, whatever they were. So here's my take on this, and I think that in every profession there are incredible professionals that do incredible work, and then there are others who don't, right? And not so much because they're not great at what they do, because they don't have the people skills to actually be able to communicate things in a way in which people respond for their highest good, right? And I think that there is a huge distinction that needs to be made between that aspect of medicine and medicine itself, right? So I think healthcare in general is broken. And I think that, there's a lot to be said for the fact that when we talk about the cost of medicine, and when we talk about cost effectiveness in particular, and the cost of treating a disease versus the cost of preventing a disease is the same, that is where our problem begins, you see, because what happens is that in medicine, that what we value is essentially the solution to a problem as opposed to the prevention of a problem. Okay. And, I've taken cost effectiveness, at Harvard. So I can say that this is very much how the healthcare system is measured. It's very much by the perspective that, if it costs you X number of dollars to prevent a disease and it costs you X number of dollars to treat that disease, what we prioritize is the treatment of the disease, because ultimately, one, why spend money in advance if you don't have to, is essentially how we look at it. Two, what is it that, if there is a person right now who has the disease versus a person who will develop the disease at some point in the future, isn't it an ethical consideration that we are going to utilize that resource in treating that person who is being affected right now, as opposed to utilizing that resource to treat the person who is, going to be affected some years down the track? So my view on this is that it's not that people are doing the wrong thing, is that as a healthcare in terms of healthcare, we're valuing things in a way that is not conducive to the highest good that we could be deriving from the investment of those dollars at the outset. Right. So, of course, prevention is better than cure. If you can prevent someone from developing diabetes in the first place, as opposed to preventing someone from dying from the symptoms of diabetes, of course, the prevention of that disease in the first place is going to ensure that that person has much better quality of life in the long term. Right. But at the moment, what we value in healthcare is actually treatment as opposed to prevention. And that is what gets into the equation. And also that's also what causes many conflicts of interest. And then you add other perspectives to this, that, if you actually have someone who is sick, you can sell them medicine. Right? Or you have someone who is not in their optimum health, optimum fertility, whatever it is, you can put them through treatments that will be revenue generating. Then hang on a second, what are we actually going to do?
I was thinking about that yesterday, actually. I was thinking about cancer and chemotherapy, and how a lot of people know that chemotherapy does actually kill you, and it's good for the short term, but it's not really great for the long term, and a lot of it is to do with obviously money and, like you say, revenue. And I was kind of making that kind of comparison really with IVF, and I'm just wondering, is there a vested interest from the medical profession to not really, the conventional medicine, to not really educate themselves on kind of the more natural approaches, because it would cost them a huge amount of money.
Look, there are many paradigms colliding in those conversations, you see, and that's the difficulty, because here's the thing. Industry is obviously remunerated by creating products, chemicals, things, consumables, right, that we can consume, that we can make our life more convenient. There's all of those factors that essentially we value and we pay for. Right. On one end, those things will have a positive effect, a negative effect, or a net effect. Typically, a net effect relates to a negative effect down the track, but we don't live our lives counting all of those positive, negative, and neutral effects. We just kind of go, okay, well, this is convenient, therefore I'm going to choose this over something else. And all those choices, at some point, they will translate into or equate to a result down the track, and that might be disease.
Yeah.
Right? It might be disease. And so, yes, there is a lot on both sides of that equation. I think that there is no win-win argument in this situation, because in the same token that we could say that medicine is failing women, we could say that an unregistered and kind of destandardized natural medicine kind of professional side of this equation can also imbalance that, and having a negative effect not only on women but just in people in general. So I don't think the answer is one or the other, and that's really my paradigm. That's where I come from. It's that I'm not going to choose. Why not have the best of both worlds, right? I'm not going to choose one or the other. Of course, within that, we want to choose the best possible professionals that we can access and that we can choose to support us in that process. And of course, having those professionals who will have both sides of the equation and who will be trained in both areas, of course, is going to be preferable to choosing one or the other.
And I think the understanding is as well, I mean, it's a kind of a long process. So one of your philosophies is to act pregnant now to get pregnant later, which basically takes away the whole instant gratification thing of just going to your traditional doctor and trying to get the process done within like a month or so. But I guess I was listening to you talk yesterday, and you were saying that really you need to be preparing the body for about 8 months beforehand. to have a successful pregnancy if someone's experienced fertility problems. Is that right?
Well, it depends on the case, but what I was talking about specifically in terms of that is the fact that egg maturation, the female egg goes through a process in order for it to actually be ovulated. We are born with all the eggs we'll ever have. And so what happens is that those eggs mature over time. And each cycle, we have a recruitment of a pool of eggs that gets prepared and, stimulated so that it can be ready for one, or, sometimes two or more can be ready for ovulation. Typically it's one. But what happens is that from primordial follicle, which is the follicle that the eggs that we're born with, to primary follicle takes 4 months, or approximately 4 months. From primary follicle to ovulatory follicle, it takes another 4 months. So in terms of biology, often when we talk about fertility, we think that we can just have the silver bullet that's going to give us the outcome that we want when we're struggling to conceive or keep a pregnancy to term, which is whatever it is that it may be, but that's going to give us that result instantaneously or within that cycle that we want to be pregnant. What we see for our patients, what life demonstrates, and certainly what we observe in terms of the patients that we see in our clinic, is that they've often tried all of those things. They've done multiple failed cycles of IVF, ICSI, you name it, lots of different types of treatments, even natural treatments that had failed. And so what happens is that once you go through lots of different types of therapies and strategies, and you continue to fail through all of those, it becomes harder not only to think that you will succeed, right, through anything, but also it becomes actually physically harder to conceive. At the same time, and this is the other side of the same coin, is that if you don't put in the effort that is required to optimize your health as in the best possible way that you can, then you're going to be limiting your chances and your resources to be able to create the outcome that you want to anyway. Right. So again, it's the dichotomies of life. It's like people say, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But the truth is that there are those positive effects, negative effects, and neutral effects. Often people want to have a positive outcome with lots of neutral and negative input being put into that equation. The truth is, we know in the overall balance of the universe, right, that doesn't happen. There is cause and effect, there's action and reaction. And so what happens is that a reaction or an outcome or a current result is simply and merely the outcome of the actions that preceded that, right? So as much as we might want to hack biology, it's never going to happen, right? Because in like just plain universal speak, right, we know it's action and reaction, it's action and consequence, right? And so that's what we're dealing with. This is no different than that very simple concept, complex concept, but we can kind of simplify it in this term. Very important to remember that.
Just going back to, thank you for that. Just going back to what you were saying earlier about science, a lot of your work is based in science. And that's fantastic because that makes it so much more credible. I follow, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza. He's very heals the body with the mind. And he's recently got huge. He's been doing his work for many, many, many years. But it's because a lot of his research is based in science, a lot of people are tending to think, yeah, this is actually quite credible. It's not just some kind of natural, kind of hippie woo-woo thing.
Absolutely. And look, at the end of the day, that's essentially why we gather data, right? There is a meme that always makes me laugh is, in God we trust, everyone else must bring data. And that's very much what this is about, because, it's only by the aggregation of that data that we can see what actually works, right? And if it works in this kind of population, are they different in some way to another population? And so we need to be asking those questions as well, in terms of, when we try something or when we're about to try something. Let's say, for example, we want to go down the IVF path. Well, okay, that's great. But how are the people who go through IVF different to the people who decide that they're going to optimize their health and improve their chances of conception to begin with? The reality of what I see is that there is a huge opportunity for crossover in implementing optimal health and self-care in the standard therapy and standard care right now. And it certainly does decrease the number of cycles that one needs in order to conceive. In fact, tomorrow I do an episode every week. Ask Gabriela Rosa is the name of these live episodes, and I've started the talk that you're talking about right now was the egg quality talk that I did last week. And next week, I'm actually doing one on how to improve your chances of IVF and ICSI working. Because what happens is that often we think that we are recommended to go down a certain path, and we think that that is the whole solution. What I see for my patients in particular, and what I see for people who have been struggling for a long time, is that if that was the only part of the answer, every single IVF cycle would yield a baby. Every single cycle. Because the second that you put an egg and a sperm together, you should have a baby. Therefore, when that doesn't happen, you really need to start questioning, what are the obstacles here? What are the things that are getting in the way? What is it that needs to be done differently in order for this to work in the best possible way? So, it's about questioning the unquestioned to really get to a different outcome. Like Einstein said, there's no way that we're going to get a different result by doing the same action over and over and over again. Right. And so we need to really dig deeper and figure out, okay, given that this is the case, this assumption that I've made, this hypothesis that this is the way that I'm going to get pregnant, this is the way that I'm going to, what I have to do in order to get there. If life is demonstrating that clearly that is not the way, we then need to start looking at, okay, well, what else is there? What else is in the way here that I need to look at that perhaps I haven't yet?
What are the most common questions that you get asked, Gabby?
Wow, gosh, having run events for over 115,000 people, I promise you that there aren't many questions that I don't get asked. But I think that these questions in terms of how to improve female fertility, how to improve egg quality, how to improve sperm, how to improve the chances of taking home a healthy baby, how to decrease the risk of miscarriage. All of those questions, they are very, very popular questions that are asked very frequently. The answer in the top level is always going to come down to what I always say, which you've alluded to previously, which is act pregnant now to get pregnant later. Because what does that mean? Well, just to put it very simply, for the people listening in who perhaps haven't heard me talk about this before, or even who have and are still a little bit confused about that question, of what is it to act pregnant now to get pregnant later? Well, very simply put, both fertility is a team sport. Right? It really is categorically a 50-50 equation. People don't just conceive on solo reproduction, despite the fact that they might actually approach that task of having a baby on their own. They're still going to need another gamete. Right? They're still going to need either an egg or a sperm. And so in order to, and we also know that in terms of the egg has to do a lot of work to address the genetic, abnormalities within a sperm when fertilization occurs. If that egg is already struggling a little bit, or if it doesn't have as much energy as what would be ideal, then of course it's going to decrease the chances of that pregnancy moving forward and happening in the first place. So one of the things, the very first thing that I tell all of my patients, and certainly my couples who we treat, is that the male, often in standard therapy and standard care, we really neglect the participation and the input that the male has in this equation. They are just as important, and it is just as vital to have them be as healthy as they can possibly be as it is for the woman, because in any given day, the way in which this whole wonderful chaotic and yet perfectly balanced thing that we call dance, that we call conception occurs, is going to be 50% because of the male, 50% because of the female. So within you right now, no matter what, you already have 50% of that little baby that you want to create, right? And so what happens is, with the gentleman listening in, let's just indulge me for a moment. Imagine if for a second you could be pregnant, right? Imagine, I know that the population of the world will probably decrease slightly over time. Could be good for climate change. Just joking, gents. I know you're tough. Men getting pregnant would be a different thing for sure. But in saying that, imagine if you were pregnant right now. Let's just indulge me for a little moment here. If you could be, what does that mean? Like, what are the things that you would immediately, as women, we know instinctively almost, right? Even if we have not been pregnant yet, or have been pregnant before, instinctively we know if we're protecting an embryo, if we're protecting a baby, there are things that we're going to start doing or that we're going to stop doing immediately, right? And here's the thing, the time to start and stop doing those things is actually in the 120 days to 240 days of preconception preparation, where we're preparing the cells that are 50% of that equation to be the healthiest they can be, because those cells are going to be I often say that a child's health is the lowest common denominator of both partners, both prospective parents' health at the time of conception. So if we're really looking at doing the very best that we can, not only to increase our chances of conception, but increase the chances of keeping a healthy pregnancy to term, and of course, delivering a healthy baby, that's how we begin. And that is the importance of acting pregnant now to get pregnant later. So we can improve and optimize every one of those steps that are along the path of wanting to get pregnant, where you initially have that thought in your mind that I would like to be pregnant, I'd like to be a mom or a dad, and I want to have a baby, to the actual end result of doing it, right? That is very much, it begins, first of all, in that thought. And then, of course, the actions that must follow in order for that to occur are going to be very important. But that is why I often say, in fact, it's one of my primary teachings, that acting pregnant now to get pregnant later is going to be the way that you need to not only get pregnant, but also keep a healthy pregnancy to term, or at least do your very best, to improve, to change the odds in your favor.